It's interesting. I feel like we are in a stage of digestion in terms of trying to really understand what the impact is in terms of some of the tariffs and some of the policies that we're seeing that came out of the U.S. government over the last 3 to 6 months. But in terms of where we are today in terms of real estate investors, and also just from the sessions that we've had this morning, it's clear that there's still views are being formed today that I think will impact capital flows in the next 6 to 12 months. I would say there was maybe some cautious optimism that this was not going to impact, or some of these policies would not impact capital flows. Just recently, obviously with the big beautiful tax bill that came out, there's actually some policies that directly impact effectively our foreign investors in real estate in terms of how tax effective rates are implemented in a detrimental way. And so that's creating further pause in terms of how investors think about U.S. investing today. I love Europe. I've lived in Europe for almost 5 years, but it is a patchwork. So if you want to do business in France, it's very different than doing business in Germany, very different than doing business in Italy. And that is obviously one of the reasons why the U.S. has excelled in terms of GDP growth, et cetera, as well as a good framework and system. Well, it's interesting, just having talked to some of my friends, Canada seems to be increasingly interesting for some investors. Obviously very similar in some respects to the US, also very different in other respects in terms of maturity of markets, especially in terms of certain sectors. Is a combination for Europe is obviously it is difficult, but it's not impossible. It has been done. And then more importantly, there may be fiscal stimulus coming through because of some of the spending that's being quasi-enforced, right? So that is, I think, for some investors, very interesting in terms of thinking about long-term demographics and why Europe might be more interesting than it was 3 or 4 years ago. Yeah, I would say, look, for certain subsectors, as an example, there's a subsector within industrial called advanced manufacturing. Power is very important. Having the ability to access that power, talking to the utilities, getting the hookups, et cetera, is this extra step that you didn't have to have 3 or 4 years ago in terms of when you think about real estate. Data centers are obviously the big topic in terms of how much power they're using. I do think that there's a certain point where you're starting to see this a little bit, where the current infrastructure can't handle the demand of what they need. That's very clear. So other alternatives are coming up, and so I think that's also very interesting. Where we are in today's world, maybe higher level, is that my view is that real estate is become very much an operating business in terms of what you need to effectively generate return, and that means growing cash flow. Any lens that you look at in terms of real estate, you have to look at more maybe as an operating business than you have had historically, especially when we had declining interest rates and declining cap rates. Long term, I'm still very, very pro-US in terms of as a market. Understand that there's a pause, but also with that pause, I think there's opportunity. And so understand why there's some reluctance or some noise in the market that may cause people to pause. But sometimes that pause also creates maybe a little bit of if you have a longer term view, the ability to take advantage of what is, to your point earlier about construction, limited construction, good demographics generally, and despite everything going on, the US economy is still growing, which is kind of unbelievable based on all the self-inflicted wounds we've had.